Okay, ladies, here we are. What I've done is I have made some annotations of flames and dangling wire. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a video of myself going through the annotations with you. The idea being that you can go through in your own time with your headphones, stopping, starting, pausing, whatever's easiest for you to get these done. So let's start on. On a highway over the marshland, off to one side, the smoke of different fires in a row, like fingers spread and dragged to smudge, is a rubbish dump, always burning. The first thing you're going to notice is the form of the poem. Now, unlike Journey to the North Coast, this one is split into even stanzas of 4 lines and is an elegy for the scrap heap that modern culture ends up on. An elegy being a poem that is read at a funeral, a poem for mourning. The highway over the marshland serves as a symbol of transition and journeying. It provides the audience with a visual image. They're exiting the city and entering into a new and unfamiliar world. So the smoke is personified as ugly and destructive. It's dragging its fingers, it's smudging along humanity. So it's representative of human violence perpetrated against the environment. When you think of a rubbish dump, you don't think of renewables, you don't think of recycling. It's basically contained pollution. And that's kind of what Gray's getting into here. The always burning extended metaphor. Okay, so we've gone into this before. This place, as you would have seen from Gray's commentary, is being compared to the Greek ideal of hell, Hades. So the burning is the extended metaphor, painting the rubbish dump as a representation of an eternal hell, a damnation. Another argument we could make is that the dump is a pathetic fallacy representing the excesses of modern life. Now, pathetic fallacy, one might argue, is usually limited to the weather. Not so. In this case, the setting acts as a pathetic fallacy representing the excesses of modern life, and we'll go into what those are. Behind us, the city, driven like stakes into the earth. A water bird lifts above this swamp as a turtle moves on the Galapagos shore. So again, you've got this violent imagery driven like stakes into the earth. If you think about stakes being driven into the earth, to make a fence, it is loud and it is violent. So this imagery is a commentary on the destructive effects of urbanisation on the environment. And this is extended over here. We've got the contrasting positive imagery of a water bird lifts above this swamp as a turtle moves on the Galapagos shore. That is a simile. So, as natural as it is for a turtle to be in the Galapagos, is how natural it is for this water bird to be in this swamp. So it's the contrasting the positive imagery of nature with the vile city and what is about to become the vile dump, shows the natural coexistence between wildlife and the dump. It is a really, really interesting commentary on the coexistence between the environment and pollution. The flight of the water bird, however, suggests that they are trying to leave the dump. So it's reinforcing the negative impact that humanity has had on the environment. If you think about every garbage dump that there is in Australia, that was once a natural landscape. It has now been repurposed. What do you think happened to the animals there? I think that's what he wants us to ponder. We turn off down a gravel road, approaching the dump. The air wobbles in a cheap mirror and there is fog over the hot sun. Okay, so we've got the personal pronoun plural. It's Gray and one other person. And the reason that we get this, we have the we and the us smattered throughout the poem because it's positioning for the audience to see what he sees. Gray is including us in this imagery, in a sense, because we too are complicit in some ways in the destruction of the environment. All the air wobbles in the cheap mirror. This is a metaphor, and it compares the air to the mirror. It evokes this really weird image of distortion, like the world is distorted and the perception of reality that exists within the dump. It also, I would argue that it's kind of tactile imagery, because you know how when it's a very, very hot day, the air seems to kind of wobble off the tar on the road. I think that is what he's trying to get at here too. And then we've got the fog over the hot sun. So it's a surreal environment. It's almost post-apocalyptic in its sense of foreboding. So because the sun is a symbol of light, which Gray likes to use rather often, it being covered in fog is a symbolism of the dark, sinister nature of the environment which we are about to enter. And the assonance of the O again contributes to the discomforting post-apocalyptic imagery. Now the distant buildings are stenciled in the smoke, and we come to a landscape of tin cans, of cars like skulls that is rolling in its sand dune shapes. All right, so immediately we have the alliteration of the S and the metaphor stenciled in smoke. It emphasizes that the closer we get to the dump, the further we are from the achievements of civilization. So when you think about the lovely, clean cities that we live in, we don't often pause to think about the waste we create, from the packets of food we eat at recess to makeup wipes to things like that. Those things are tidily disposed of. If you're in the Kingsgrove area on a Monday morning and you don't have to think about it again, well, in the dump you have to think about it again because you're in it. Oh, yeah, the landscape of tin cans, of cars like skulls. This conveys this environment to be one of death and decay. And through the comparison of man-made machines, so we've got the landscape of cars like skulls. And the warning here is that materialism will quite literally be the death of us. Death is a motif that pervades this poem. And the irony of the sand dune shapes. There is nothing in this tip, at least, that is anywhere near resembling nature, resembling sand dunes. So this metaphor is therefore ironic. The environment is hollow, devoid of natural shape. But the shape of the rubbish mimics the land that perhaps stood there once. Amongst these vast grey plastic sheets of heat, shadowy figures who seem engaged in identifying the dead, they are the attendants in overalls and goggles. Right. Sheets of heat, we've got the internal rhyme and the tactile imagery. Sheets of heat. It represents the suffocating heat and the synthetic matter decaying in the landscape. If you think about the smell of, say, if you've got some tarpaulin in your backyard and the smell of the heat on that, think about that amplified 1,000 times over, standing in the tip in summer, that kind of suffocating plastic synthetic heat. That's what's being created here. And the shadowy figures are seen as foreboding. Who are these figures? They are devoid of identity and they're engaged in identifying the dead. They're not doing forensic work. This is the personification of rubbish. So these people, these shadowy figures whose identities we don't have, are identifying the dead, not dead people or even dead animals, but picking through the rubbish to see if anything can be salvaged. And this kind of alludes to humanity's future if we're not careful how we go. And the attendants, again, in overalls and goggles, the anonymity and the dehumanization of workers. These workers don't have facial features or names or anything of the sort. There's no really identifying features because they've got their overalls and their goggles. But the comment being made is that the destruction of the natural world has resulted in the degradation of humanity, humanity being the sanitation workers in this instance. Forking over rubbish on the dampened fires, a sour smoke is hauled out everywhere, thin like rope. There are others moving, scavengers. So the sour smoke, we have, of course, alliteration, but also the olfactory imagery. So it establishes a lingering scent of death and decay that is present in the dump. And the simile of the smoke, thin like rope, it emphasizes the vastness and inescapability of the dump. The sour smoke is everywhere. And there are others moving, scavengers. So again, we have the end dash, the punctuation, which fragments the sentence. The underlying message here is that consumerism and capitalism for some to live parasitically amongst the rubbish that we produce. Not only do we not really think of the rubbish we produce, according to Gray, we also don't think about the people less fortunate who are forced to pick among it, people who go through bins and stuff on recycling bin morning, picking out aluminium cans to sell. These people exist, and they exist amongst this sort of hellscape that humanity has created. As in hell, the devils might poke through our souls after scraps of appetite with which to stimulate themselves. So again, it's comparing the scavengers to devils, which sustains the extended metaphor representing the dump as a hell. And we've got the assonance of the O here, might poke about through our souls. It emphasizes the grotesque imagery. And further comments on the dehumanization of society. These devils are actually people. They are poking around through the refuse of humanity for some kind of sustenance. So these figures seem to come wandering in despondence with an eternity where they can find some peculiar sensation. So that bit there reinforces again the extended metaphor of the dump as a hell, because the dehumanized figures are searching for meaning in a literal but also a spiritual wasteland, which kind of links to the Judeo-Christian idea of hell as a place of constant wandering, seeking, never having needs met or fulfilled. And the peculiar sensation bit here is kind of ironic, because given the way that the dump has been portrayed as a ancient Greek level of hell, there is no positive sensation present. So these guys are going to wander for a figurative eternity, looking for a peculiar sensation that we know that they won't find. The eternal damnation that Gray stipulates for the characters is one resided to the work in the rubbish dump. So people who are working in the rubbish dump are condemned to live among this hell that humanity as a whole has created. And again, talking about the sanitation workers as these figures reinforces the dehumanization again. We get out and move about also. The smell is huge, blasting the mouth dry, the tons of rotten newspaper and great cuds of cloth. Okay, so there's a really interesting technique going on here. It's called synesthesia, and synesthesia is when you link two different senses to create an image. So it engages senses of touch and smell and sight, so it's more than two in this case, to overwhelm the audience through the grotesque sensation. So the smell is huge. It blasts the mouth dry. And down here, we've got the consonants, so tons of rotten newspaper and great cuds of cloth. If you say it out loud, the harsh plosives become evident. So that and the hyperbole of tons of rotten newspaper, which may not be hyperbole depending on which dump they're at, again unify to convey the horrific sights and smells of the dump. And the ellipsis there is very intentional. The sentence goes on. The smell is huge. It blasts the mouth dry. There's rotten paper. There's cuds of cloth. It's almost an accumulation of grotesque imagery punctuated by an ellipsis representing the never-ending expanse of it. And standing there, I see the mirage of the city. I realize I'm in the future. This is how it shall be after men have gone. It will be made of things that worked. All right, so again, the metaphor of the mirage of the city, there are two ways you could take this. You could say that in the dump we are so far from the city as to not see it, or the mirage could be relating to the city as an illusion of prosperity. We buy things all the time without thinking about where it inevitably ends up. And the dump is the unfortunate reality of that consumerist society in which we all exist. And then again, we've got the smatterings of the personal pronouns. It conveys that the voice is having an epiphany here. They're having an introspective moment, thinking about the bleak future of humanity should we continue to consume and consume and consume the way we do. This is how it shall be after men have gone is future tense, and it's juxtaposed immediately with the present. The point being made here is that the persona realizes the garbage is the only thing that will remain as an identifiable aspect of humanity after people have gone, if we keep on this route. We made of things that work is a despondent comment on how humanity has lost itself in its pursuit of technologized urbanization. The things we buy, the things we throw away, the things we throw away instead of using and reusing, it all has a price, and the price will be paid if we do not change our ways. So in this sense, the poem is didactic. Gray wants us to learn a lesson. A labourer hoists an unidentifiable mulch on his fork, throws it in the flame. Something flaps like the rag held up in the raft of the Medusa. Now, the raft of the Medusa, I'll get to in a minute. But this parallels the anonymity of the workers. Again, a labourer. Who? Male, female, what do they look like? Nothing. They're a labourer. Emphasising again their own dehumanisation. The flame, again, we've got the hellfire imagery, and then the rag held up in the raft of the Medusa. Now, a bit of history for you. The Medusa was a ship that was on its way to colonise Senegal hundreds of years ago. There was something like 147 people on board. The ship, of course, got wrecked. The Medusa ship got wrecked, and people clung to rafts to survive. At the end of this, between 10 and 15 people only survived the horrific tragedy, and they signalled for help by waving the above red cloth. There are a couple of parallels that can be drawn from this. First of all, I don't know if it's immediately evident from this artwork, but the people on the raft that left the Medusa ended up cannibalizing each other. So I think part of the commentary Gray wants to offer is on how we are eating ourselves alive with our wasteful lifestyle. There is also an element of retribution here. If these people had not gone to colonize Senegal, if they had just stayed home and minded their business, they wouldn't be in this trouble. So I think, again, the allegory here extends to humanity. If we continue on our path to ruin, we will suffer similarly to those on the raft of the Medusa. It was also one of the first paintings to show ugliness, to show tragedy in art, allegedly. And it also was it was part of the Romantic movement. It was a Romanticist painting. So again, this ties in with Gray's context. We approach another through the smoke, and for a moment he seems that demon with the long barge pole. It is a man wiping his eyes. Someone who worked here would have to weep. So again, the motif of smoke, obscuring vision, yet at last we do encounter another person. We see the person go from demon with a stick to a man having really strong feelings, wiping his eyes. So the dash again evokes a dramatic pause, emphasizing that revelation. It's not a demonic figure. It is just a man, a human like they are. The alliteration of W and the assonance of O in the last one evokes pity and sorrow from the audience. So this person has been dehumanized. The sanitation workers have been characterized as demons, hopping among the hills and mounds of hell. But as you get closer, once you permeate the smoke, we see, Gray sees, the persona sees, that they're just humans like we are. And they're weeping. I would argue that the person may not be literally weeping. The weeping could be metaphorical. It could be that their eyes are stinging and weeping from the smoke of the garbage heap. That, I believe, is open to interpretation. So the dump worker here is allegorical of humanity. He's dehumanized, devalued. It's not so much that Gray is blaming humanity here. He's wanting us potentially to reconnect with our own humanity, to think of the results of our actions. And so we speak. The rims beneath his eyes are wet as an oyster and red. Knowing all that he does about us, how can he avoid a hatred of men? Again, we have the first person inclusive. We see a rare moment of contact between humans in the poem. And this is where the potential redemptive arc does begin. So, eyes as wet as an oyster. It's a powerful visual image. He acknowledges their humanity. So this person is suffering, whether they are crying because they are having an emotional moment or their eyes are stinging and watering from the sour smoke coming from the dump. This is no longer a dehumanized little devil hopping from one tin can to the next. This is an actual human being with human reactions. Again, us being the inclusive language implicates not only the voice and their companion, but the audience. How can he avoid a hatred of men? So again, it's building empathy for the cleaner, for the sanitation worker, considering their perspective, but also considers the impact our lives have on the environment around us. Going on, I notice an old radio that spills its dangling wire, and I realise that somewhere the voices it received are still travelling. All right, so this is some pretty disgusting visceral imagery. The connotations of a body disemboweled. So all these wires are spilling out of a hole in the old radio. It conveys the dump as a grotesque, horrible hellscape. But then we have another end dash. So the punctuation shifts the perception. It's beyond the material object now, symbolizing that both journeys that individuals go on and the enduring value of the human voice and expression. Gray could not be a poet if he did not value aspects of humanity, because it's what he writes about. It's what allows him to write. So the contrast evoked between the radio and the voices it emits emphasizes how humanistic components of existence are more enduring than the material. Yes, this old radio is on the garbage heap, but the voices live on, potentially in the people who spoke them, potentially in the memory of those that heard them. And this is where we come out of the pessimism and a more optimistic view is put forth, skidding away, riddled around the arc of the universe, and with them the horse laughs and the Chopin, which was the sound of the curtains lifting one time to a coast of light. All right, so the arc of the universe, that's symbolic of the permanency of the human endeavor. So there have been beneficial ideas created by humanity, beneficial inventions, and those can endure. That's the point he's making here. Chopin is a classical, I believe, Polish composer. He did really important romantic works. And it's symbolic of the free expression and creativity that links nature and humanity. And this is what we must value, not material goods, but the beauty of free thought, of art. Okay, when they're talking about horse laughs, they're not talking about literal horses. They're talking about like the canned laughter that you get on sitcoms. You don't really get it that much these days, but if you've ever watched The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, every time Will Smith does a joke, there's something called a canned laugh, a pre-recorded laugh. That's the horse laugh. So the horse laughs and the Chopin, which was the sound of the curtains lifting. So we have the overwhelming presence of images of despair from previous stanzas, but now they're juxtaposed with an accumulation of positive audio imagery, the beauty of art, the canned laughter, yes, it's cheesy, but of comedy, of humour, of connection, the sound of the curtains lifting one time to a coast of light. Okay, again, Robert Gray does love to use light as a motif for hope and beauty. And this final image has a double meaning, and it's evoked through the metaphor of the coast of light. It refers to one of two things. First of all, one could suggest that it is an image of despondency. It conveys how humanity has lost something beautiful and valuable due to the degradation and destruction wrought by humanity's excessive impulses. So one could take it to mean that, yes, we once had laughter and classical music and curtains lifting, but now we're in the dump. Or we could see it, take it thusly. It is an image of hope for humanity, and it lies in fostering a connection with nature as well as appreciating and following in the footsteps of enlightened creatives such as Chopin. So basically, what Gray is also saying here is that there is redemption. There is a possibility for redemption for humanity. We just need to see it. All right, ladies, thank you very much. I hope that has been helpful, and I will see you in class.